Madagascar is a dream destination for nature enthusiasts, but also for photographers. Since 2017, I've been leading photographic workshops with Nature's Light to the island. So this video today is basically going to be about Madagascar and why I think this is one of the places you should consider as a bucket list location for photography. Now, Madagascar is the world's fourth largest island and the second largest island country. It is roughly 587,000 kilometers, so it's approximately twice the size of Arizona in the United States, or larger than the United Kingdom, or larger than Germany, in fact. So it's a pretty big country, yet it only has 23.5 million people as its population, so it's relatively sparsely populated in terms of countries of this size. The people themselves, or the Malagasy, first arrived in the country between 500 and 700 AD, and they were essentially Indonesian people who had come over the ocean, over the Indian Ocean, from the Indonesian island. Historians assume in pirogues and dugout canoes that they would have navigated via various smaller islands to be able to reach there. Now, it's not just these people who are in the country, and these are essentially what we would now today call the Merina people. There are at least 18 different recognized groups on the island, which means that it is an incredibly diverse cultural sort of melee that you're going to get inside the island itself. For a start, in around 1000 AD, there were Bantu peoples that made the crossing from the Mozambican Channel in Africa across over that to Madagascar. So you will see distinct different groupings and different peoples, although the culture for the most part is more or less the same, but with various different cultural traits between them. As it is, there are something like 40 different dialects that can be heard inside the island, although the primary languages are Malagasy and French. Another grouping that had a very large impact on the island has been the Indian travelers who came down also around 1000 AD or 1100 AD and brought with them the zebu cattle that are synonymous with Madagascar today. So if you travel through to the island, you're going to see zebu cattle and the cattle culture itself, which has had an outsized impact on the island itself. Prior to 1000 AD, it was a deeply forested island. And with the introduction of cattle, large parts of that forest were burned away and turned into pastoral grazing lands, which is pretty much what you see now on the south and the west side of the island itself. So too did the Arab traders also have a large impact, to the point that there were even Arab city-states in the northeast of the island, so around Irodo, for instance. However, you cannot separate France from Madagascar, because in the mid-1800s or the 19th century, France annexed Madagascar, and it was only in 1960 that the Malagasy actually received independence, and after which there were something like 4 different republics that have been formed since then. So politically, it's an interesting country that has had ups and downs over the last 60 years, to the point that even this year there was a series of protests that basically led to the changing of government. And at the moment, as I speak this, there's an interim government in place. Although, speaking to my friends who live on the island, they're pretty happy about the outcome so far, and it was certainly ripe for change. But that's not why you're necessarily wanting to go to Madagascar. As a photographer, you're wanting to travel to Madagascar because of its extraordinary bounty in terms of the endemic species, the nature that you're likely to see there, the landscapes and the people that you are potentially able to meet and photograph. Now, interestingly, Madagascar, although it is such an extraordinary location, has very few tourists that actually travel there. In 2024, they recorded a high of 308,000 visitors to the island. This isn't a very accurate number, but a lot of those visitors are either there for work, business, or potentially just family traveling back and forth between the different islands themselves. The actual tourist numbers for Madagascar are extremely low for such a large country. Part of the reason why tourism is so low is because of the road network, which is poor, to put it mildly. Certain areas don't have roads, they just have sand tracks that travel through the forest or through the bush. The tar roads that do exist are often really badly maintained and full of potholes, meaning that traveling even up to as little as 200 kilometers can take a full day of travel. That said, there are networks of road that have been upgraded and maintained and built all afresh in the north that have taken travel from days down to a matter of a few hours. In particular, the road from Ambilobe across from Nosy Bay in the north right up to the northernmost point of Diego Suarez as well as the road from Ambilobe to Vohema, have meant that travel time that used to take 2 days now takes 2 hours. So there has been massive improvement in some of the road network, although that doesn't always translate across the country. But the difficulty in travel is part of the allure for wanting to go and visit Madagascar in the first place, because there is an adventure in actually getting from point A to point B. And it means that rather than being faced with the phalanx of tripod-toting Instagram chasers, you very often have these iconic locations all to yourself, which is like the holy grail of photographic travel, and it's available in Madagascar. So as I say, the difficulty of getting places is part of the allure of wanting to travel here in the first place. Sand tracks that seem to just disappear into the dry forest, a main road that is really just 2 vehicle tracks over a salt pan, or innumerable rivers that have to be crossed, sometimes with the aid of dugout canoe rafts on which you place your 4-wheel drive vehicle. These are part of the adventure of traveling to this incredible place. It also contributes to that sense of authenticity, which is just missing from a whole bunch of other countries that one travels to. When you meet people in Madagascar, very often they genuinely want to engage with you and learn more about you and your culture because you are new to them. The exhaustion of the tourist gaze hasn't actually struck the island yet, so you feel like you are actually traveling for the first time to a unique location. So what is there to photograph on Madagascar? And of course, the 2 quintessential things that always come out are going to be baobabs and lemurs, and you wouldn't be far wrong thinking of these 2 iconic subjects, because of course of the 9 baobab species in the world, 7 of them are found on Madagascar. 6 are only found on Madagascar. And then there are over 100 different species of lemurs, to the point that we're still discovering new species. It was less than 5 years ago that the Jonas mouse lemur was discovered. I mean, a little thing like this. All the way through to the large 9-kilogram indri, which looks more like a monkey than it does a lemur. Regardless of where you go, there's a strong chance of being able to see lemurs, and in particularly in the north, there are a multitude of varieties there. On our Beyond the Horizon workshop to the north, you see at the very least 5 different species of lemur, some of which will literally clamber over you while you're taking photographs of them. On our very popular Exploring the Island Continent, which is a trip down through the south of the island, you spend some quality time photographing ring-tailed lemurs, the classic King Julian group of lemurs, which you will find in the interior along the mountainous spine of the country. But there's so much more to photographing Madagascar than simply baobabs and lemurs. There is an incredible biodiversity of reptiles, insects, birds, as well as a vast array of cultural practices and people that you are able to meet and photograph. There is an incredible bustle of humanity in every village and town that you enter, which is one of the reasons why we spend so much time doing street photography in places like Fianarantsoa, Bitafo, and Ambalavao. Photographers who join us on our Exploring the Island Continent photographic workshop start by meeting us in Antananarivo, the capital of the country. From there we then fly to Morondava, which is famous for the Alia de Baobab. Now this is the quintessential photograph that most people know of Madagascar, that view of a row of baobabs heading down a dirt road. For many people it's a little bit of a disappointment the first time they see this, because undoubtedly it's going to be at sunset, and it's pretty much the only time you're ever going to see other tourists there, because this is the spot that everybody gets taken to so that they can photograph the sun setting behind that row of beautiful trees. But that doesn't mean it's always filled with people, and of course we know when to go when there aren't people, so we make sure that there are multiple visits to this iconic location. But it's only one of many iconic locations on the island. We then travel south on the soft sand roads down to Belasomer, which is essentially a small village renowned for its shipwrights. So we walk through the village photographing these shipwrights as they build their dhows that will be traversing as far as Mauritius and the Comores. It's an opportunity to see the Indian Ocean culture as we wander down the shoreline of the Mozambican Channel. From there, it's a long drive through the Karindi forest where we get incredible scenes of Grandier baobabs rising up over this dry forest with the sun rising behind that. This is the heart of the spiny desert. The spiny desert is known by the tall spiny plants called an octopus plant, or the Didiera madagarensis, which is this weird kind of triffid-like plant that you're going to come across as you travel through the desert itself. But traveling through the desert then brings you to places like the White Dunes, Mangoki River itself, the Phony Baobabs of Underwaduaka. All of these are incredible scenes which are seen by only a handful of people every year, and well worth the time and effort required to be able to access them and photograph them. From the coast, we then head into the interior to Isalo. Isalo is a phenomenal low mountain range and national park that is essentially a sandstone landscape that has been formed and sculpted through millennia of wind and rain. We're actually likely to see the remnants of the Bara people's sky burials that take place in some of the caves and caverns up at the top of these sandstone cliffs. It's also home to several species of lemur, and it's also the first place that we're likely to come across the ring-tailed lemur, the red-fronted lemur, and the white sifaka, which traverse and travel through the various deep forests in this particular mountain landscape. From Isalo, we continue further into the interior, across great grassland plains where we're likely to see large herds of zebu, potentially being moved to market in Ambalavao, which is where we're heading. At Ambalavao, we go specifically to visit Anja Sanctuary, which is a small wildlife reserve at the base of the Telo Miravahavi mountain, or Three Sisters Mountain. This is an area where the ring-tailed lemur is considered fadi, or taboo to harm. So the people essentially venerate these small animals in this particular area. As a result, there are huge families of the ring-tailed lemur inside this particular reserve and all the way up the side of the mountain. The lemurs thrive in this environment, and in the early morning they come out of their little caves where they've been staying overnight and warm themselves on the sandstone rocks at the base of the mountain. And it's here that we're able to actually get up close and photograph them as they sun themselves in the early morning light. To say that this is an extraordinary photographic experience is an understatement of note. But the closest town, Ambalavao, is also home to a weekly cattle market, from which families from hundreds of kilometers away drive their cattle to in order to be able to go to this particular market. The workshop is timed specifically to be able to meet this marketplace and to be able to see some of the goings on and to photograph the activity around the haggling and the bargaining and the selecting of the animals themselves. It is an extraordinary cultural experience and something that is a highlight to be able to photograph as a street photographer. From Ambalavao, we then head further up north towards Fianarantsoa, a beautiful white city set at the base of a huge valley and overlooked by this beautiful mountain range. It is also the home of Pierre Roman, the famous Malagasy photographer or French photographer who lives in Madagascar, and we do actually visit his gallery so that you can see how it's really done. Then we travel further north to Batafo, which is essentially the breadbasket of southern Madagascar, and a huge amount of food originates from this particular area. And you can see why, because the landscape has been transformed over millennia into terraces where a huge range of vegetables and grains are grown, including the ever-present rice paddy fields. Rice basically being the staple diet of the Malagasy people themselves. Batafo is extraordinary, and again, it's one of those places that just never sees tourists. So people are genuinely curious and inquisitive when they see you walking down the side of these fields and wonder what you're doing, because you're strange to them visiting this location. And yet, photographically, you'd be a fool not to. It's incredible. The fields rival anything that you're going to see in Asia or Indonesia, and yet they're here in Madagascar, and it's incredible. And then seemingly in the blink of an eye, you're back in Antananarivo, the sprawling city of 1.3 million people in the center of Madagascar. Madagascar is such an extraordinary photographic location that a number of the photographers who've joined me there have actually come back again, because there's so much more to photograph. And it's for that reason that there are actually two separate workshops, exploring the island continent, which hits the south of the country, and then beyond the horizon, which travels through to the north, where you're more likely to see wildlife, the limestone singis, and of course, lemurs. A photographer who joined me several years ago, Steve Silk, said that traveling to Madagascar was like catching lightning in a bottle. Every scene was extraordinary. Every shoot was productive. It was so good he had to come again, and has now been to Madagascar twice with me. If Madagascar is not on your bucket list, it ought to be. It's one of those countries and one of those photographic destinations that are just extraordinary. You will create memorable images and you will want to come back. To find out more about the Nature's Light photographic workshops, you can take a look at the website, which I'm going to put down over here, and I will also put the links into the details below the YouTube screen. I will be heading there again next year on the 2026, exploring the island continent, as well as in 2027, where I will be running not one, not two, but 3 workshops, of which one of them is already full. So do take a look at the details if you are interested in photographing this extraordinary location, and hopefully I will meet you there at some point in the future. Of course, until then, I will see you again on YouTube on a future video on whatever I happen to be talking about next. Till then, cheers.